Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Think Great Experience. You are in for a treat today. I have been excited about this episode for a long time. The man that you are going to hear from today has a wealth of knowledge and experience in the Marine Corps. And I had the opportunity to meet him recently, and he agreed to be on our show during his retirement. So very honored to have him here. I want to welcome Dale Alford, United States Marine Corps Major General, retired. And for those of you that do not have a background in the military, Major General means he is a two-star general. He most recently was the commanding general of the United States Marine Corps Training Command in Quantico. He also served as the commanding general of USMC installations east at Camp Lejeune. He deployed to Afghanistan as the command general for Task Force Southwest, and among many other roles. He was the commanding general of the Marine Corps Warfighting Laboratory in Quantico, Virginia. He has commanded infantry units in combat at the platoon, company, and battalion levels, and his career in the Marine Corps has spanned over 37 years with overseas deployments to Panama, the Gulf War, the Mediterranean Sea, Liberia, Okinawa, 3 tours in Iraq, and 3 tours in Afghanistan. General, it is an absolute honor to have you here today with us, sir.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's good to be here.
I had the opportunity. I actually look back to when we met because we both met in DC, and as 2 Marines would meet, it was in a bar, and it was on August 26th. So about 3 months ago, we met, and there was 1 seat at the bar, and we were both waiting for flights. And I popped my bag down, and I remember you saying, because it was the bag I had just bought at Camp Pendleton. So I had a camouflage bag for my laptop. I popped it down, and I think before my butt even hit the seat, you said, "You were in the Marine Corps?" And then we shared a beer, and the rest is history. Now we're going to impact the world.
Yes. Yeah, you know, I say sometimes that we're a cult. It's a good cult, but we're a cult, right? So
It is an instant friendship that day. And we were texting before we even departed. So I appreciate you. I know you are in full retirement mode until February 15th. So I really appreciate you taking some time to share some of your insights with us. I've had the opportunity to listen to you on a number of different podcasts, and your stories and your experience is incredible.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Yeah, I put a marker down. My last day in the Marine Corps was 15 August. So I said, I'm going to take 6 months off. So 15 February, I'm going to start trying to work again.
We're going to talk about that too. You know, 37 years in, that's a tremendous career. And I would like to start off by asking you, you know, how did your journey in the Marine Corps begin? And what made you choose the Marine Corps?
Yeah. Well, so I graduated from high school in 1981, didn't go to college, got a job framing houses. Went to West Georgia College the next year in the fall of 82. And like a lot of young kids, I wasn't very focused. So the fall of 85, 2.5 years later, I failed out of West Georgia, wasn't making the grades. So I had joined a fraternity, Chi Phi fraternity, which I still do a lot and have a lot of contact with that fraternity and my fraternity brothers from that time. And many of us were Marines, or they were Marines. So I said, what the heck, I'll join the Marine Corps. So I enlisted in January of 85. And originally I was going active duty. And so I had a slot in June to go to boot camp. But shortly after that, my recruiter came to me, Gunny Arundel, I'll never forget him. I wish I could find him. And said he wanted to change me to being a reservist. So I'd go to boot camp. I would come back and go and get back in school. And then he said he would help me get into the officer program.
Okay.
He did exactly that. I mean, he did exactly what he was going to do. I kind of know what he was doing there because, you know, 15 years later, I was the RS, the recruiting station CO for Nashville, Tennessee. So I had all the recruiters in Tennessee, had 5 reserve units in Tennessee. So he needed a slot on the reserve. Yep. It helped him. He did exactly what he said he was doing. I did well in boot camp, got back in school, and I never made below a B after that. So I made all A's and B's because I, you know, as a young man, I found a passion. I found what I wanted to do, and I had a focus. So graduated from college in 87, December of 87, and went to TBS in June of 88. So, and originally I was only going to do 3 years. I 3-year contract for an officer, but like I said, got a rifle platoon, went to Panama through Just Cause, had 81st platoon in Desert Storm. Everybody was telling me I was good, so here I am 37 years later. So that's kind of the story if I became a Marine, because really, so my fraternity, Chi Phi, got me into the Marine Corps.
Yeah, everybody has their own unique journey. But what was interesting is we were talking in DC, with you enlisting in 85, I enlisted in 87 and I left the Corps in 91. I was honorably discharged August of 91, but it's just interesting. My entire time in the Marine Corps, you were in the Marine Corps also. So who knows if we had ever crossed any paths, you never know. But that's a long career. When you think back on the 37 years, which I think you've probably done a lot just since your retirement, are there any moments that stand out as some of the greatest moments for you? Some of the most impactful moments of your service? Yeah,
I mean, when I start, as an infantry officer, you look at 3 units, and that's a rifle platoon, a rifle company, and an infantry battalion. And I had an opportunity to be in harm's way in all 3 of those. So Panama, Liberia, and then both Afghanistan and Iraq as a battalion commander. And so I was a platoon commander in 3-6. So I had a rifle platoon in 81st platoon, Panama Desert Storm. So deployed 2 combat tours with 3-6, 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines.
Mm-hmm.
But then I commanded 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines. So, and I took them to Afghanistan and Iraq. So I deployed 4 times to combat with that battalion. So I look back, I just was the guest of honor at the 3rd Battalion, 6 Marines birthday ball.
Oh, wow.
About the 4th or 5th time I've been there over the years since I gave up command. So that battalion, particularly when I was a battalion commander, commanded a battalion both in Afghanistan and Iraq in some pretty tough situations. I can never replace that. That's the pinnacle of my career and probably my life. It's hard to describe the impact of being in charge of 1,000 Marines in harm's way that you had such close contact with over the years.
I think it's interesting because in the civilian sector, the business sector, everybody faces challenges. Now, I think you'd probably be the first to acknowledge that there's different levels of challenges, especially in harm's way. Some people in the business sector may feel like, well, I have a supply chain issue. But you've experienced combat. And when you have Marines in your command and you're in that combat environment, I mean, are there tactics that you use to help increase morale, to get people refired up, refocused on the mission when the challenge was so severe? Were there things that you did or you found successful in that realm?
Yeah. I think the number one thing, particularly as a battalion commander, but all 3, company command, platoon command, as a battalion commander is you got to be out there amongst them all the time. So therefore it requires a significant amount of trust in your staff, right? The battalion XO, the battalion operations officer, both which are majors. So a battalion commands a lieutenant colonel. Mm-hmm. Those are major, and your staff underneath it, because if you're back there running your staff, you're not out touching your Marines when they're in harm's way, and particularly in this war. The march to Baghdad was different, right? We were a battalion unit. I was an XO of a battalion, the second in charge, moving as a battalion, fighting as a battalion. But after that, 2004, 2005, 2006, as a battalion commander, we were dispersed. We were dispersed all over Eastern Afghanistan in 2004, and then again in Western Iraq in 2005, 2006. So battlefield circulation and being amongst your Marines is vitally important. So I was very rarely back at the command post. I was out with the company's platoons and squads, and that's what it takes. They have to see their leader out front with them. in the same dangers that they're in. And if not, they won't have the trust in it that you need to win battles.
I think that trust factor is so important. And as a as a business coach, I can see when trust exists at high levels in organizations and when it's suffering. And it's interesting. When I was in the Marine Corps, I remember one of my staff sergeants had just said, I was new. It was brand new to my base. I just gotten out of my schooling. I reported to Yuma, and I wasn't there very long. And he said, let's get off base. Let's just get off base and talk. And I thought I was actually in trouble. So I thought I'd done something wrong. And I remember he just took me to breakfast and just got to know me a little bit, just asked some questions about my family. And I didn't expect that. And I think that oftentimes leaders do the unexpected, which is actually more common sense than it should be unexpected. But just getting to know your people, getting to know your Marines is so critical, especially in those situations.
And the higher up you go, the harder it is. And the higher up you go, your troops, your subordinates change of who you actually can touch. Senior as a general, my last command, for instance, I had 17 colonel commands spread across the United States. So those 17 colonels were my troops. I spent all of my time on the road visiting those 17 colonels, which is significant. So the point of that is, in order to be, I believe, a great leader, a good leader, you have to be out and touch your subordinate souls. You got to understand their hopes and their dreams. And the way to do that is kneecap to kneecap, breaking bread and being there. And that's where the trust is built. You start to understand how your subordinates think, and therefore, when you give your commander's intent, you give your priority, you give your vision, you know which ones understand it, which ones need a little more attention, and so forth. That's the art of leadership, is understanding and touching people's souls.
I think you hit the nail on the head there, General. I think there's not enough soul touching happening in leadership these days. Specifically, and I can speak with authority on the business sector. I don't think that they're going in and trying to touch souls, like you said. And if I'm not mistaken, I mean, with 16, 17 colonels, and I believe I had heard at one point, at that colonel level, the 06, one was a captain in the Navy as well.
15 colonels and 2 Navy captains, so 17. Right.
And they weren't geographically located where this was easy for you, so you spent a lot of time flying to see these.
A lot of time in it, but that's the only way to do it. And every organization, company, unit that you have to figure out as the leader where you need to be. And most of the time, I have found that it is out amongst people. There's times when you need to pull back and be at the heart of the command center, but I find that rare, particularly if you trust and develop your next subordinates down. So the next man down, next man or woman or Marine, in my case, in the past, is you got to train them and give them, inspire them, motivate them, and then trust them to take your job.
That's correct. I mean, it's so much easier to delegate to people that you've built a relationship with, have the trust with, spend some one-on-one time, like you said, kneecap to kneecap with them. I think there's too many leaders out there that are trying to do it all from, whether it's their headquarters or the command center or their home office, if you will, their headquarter office. And they just, for some reason, think that once they get to this new level, they don't have to do that stuff anymore. And to your point, the higher up you go, perhaps the more important it is, because it's going to be harder to get to all those people.
Yeah. You state your vision, you state your priorities, you state your intent, and then you got to preach it like a South Georgia evangelistic preacher, right? You got to preach the word every day. I mean, and the way that you show your priority is with time. If you can say, it's the say-do gap, right? You say one thing and do the opposite, and you got to say your priorities, and then you got to do them. You have to do them with your time. And being a leader, when you're in command, for us or in command of a company, it requires a significant amount of your time. You have to It takes weekends. It takes Sunday mornings. It takes
Yes.
time. You need to talk to your family about what it takes to be in command during the time that you're in charge. That's just to do it right and to touch people's souls and to motivate, inspire, and trust them. You got to be out amongst them.
You absolutely can't do it with that 8 and skate mindset, the 9 to 5 mindset. You know, I've said it so many times before, General. You know, the real magic happens before the workday starts and after the workday starts. That's where I think that some of those calls, those visits, they make such an impact on people. And I love it. I'm going to borrow it from you too about touching souls. I think that needs to be one of the greatest priorities of any leader in any organization, is to touch souls, to build that camaraderie up, to build the trust that happens when you understand their dreams, when you understand their goals. That's huge. And that's just not done enough these days. But you also led by example.
Yeah, another thing, yeah, here, leading by example is also the ability to say, hey, XO, you know, your COO, you got it. I'm going 2 weeks. I'm going on a cruise, and my phone's not going to be on that much either. Only call me if the business is burning down, type things. And you got to be willing to walk away for those 2 weeks. And that's also leading by example, to show that you do trust them, and then they need to take time with their families as well. And most of them don't do that enough.
I agree. And I see that in the business sector so much, where people cannot leave on vacation because they haven't developed their direct reports. They haven't developed them enough where they can take over. And so even if they do go on vacation, they're on their phone the whole time.
Or trust enough, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, I love that you put it as they have to make the decision to go see their people, right? Leaders have to make that decision. I can tell you already, just 15 minutes in, this audience out there is taking notes on everything that you're saying. I can guarantee you that. Decisions. I read this study one time, and it said that the average human makes 35,000 decisions a day. I really don't know who they were studying to get that, but I do have a teenage daughter, and I think that half of her decisions are by 9 a.m. just on her outfits, but that's another story. But the decision-making process, as a Marine, one of our leadership traits in JJ Did Tie Buckle was decisiveness. It was also mentioned in the 11 leadership principles: make sound and timely decisions. What I found in the business sector is that there's a lot of reluctant leaders. They're afraid to make decisions. I can only imagine in 37 years, you have had to make some of the toughest decisions anyone can make. Would you be willing to share some of those tough decisions and maybe some of the outcomes that have happened because you had to make the right decision or a sound decision, even if the outcome wasn't exactly 100% what you expected it to be?
Yeah. I mean, I have one event, I guess, that sticks out in my mind the most, of a decision I had to make and did make. And maybe I wished I had a do-over. So there's a few I wished I had do-over. This one in particular. So it's November 5th. Is it November 5th? Yeah, it's I'm trying to think of the date, but it's in November of 2005, Operation Steel Curtain. We're pushing from east to west all the way out on the Syrian border in the little province called Al-Qaim. 5 different cities, towns. We're in the first one. Literally got three rifle companies online, clearing house to house, street to street. It's a very urban combat's a very tedious, time consuming, resource consuming, people consuming way of attacking. No other way to do it except to destroy the whole place, which is not acceptable. And as we're moving, we're getting sniped, we're getting hit by IEDs. Every street that we moved, the bad guys were falling back, and we're able to go from house to house without us being able to get them. But I knew if I could get to the south of the town of Sadah, if I could get my sniper platoon, about a 35-man sniper platoon, up on that high ground, they would be able to pick them off as they crossed the streets as they fell back. It was my idea. And it worked. I mean, it did work. But I knew that hill had IEDs on it. We already knew it. That every hilltop was prepped with IEDs to stop us from putting helicopters on them, particularly, and observation up on the high ground. But I needed that hill, so I pushed the sniper platoon up there, and the first vehicle, like I knew was going to hit an IED, and it killed the driver, wounded all 5 Marines, including the platoon commander who was in the lead vehicle, first lieutenant. But it killed the driver, Corporal Stalvey. 6'2", 220, blonde hair, blue eyed, just an absolute stud. And they end up clearing that hill, finding the IEDs. We had an EOD team, the ones who find the bombs and defuse them with them. And they were able to accomplish the mission. And we were able to take that town without losing kill. We didn't have any more killed during that phase of the operation. We had so that's a tough decision when you know the danger. But the mission, I hate to say it, right? We always say mission Marines. I have this saying, I say the mission, the Marines, then me. You can do that. If you can focus on the mission, your Marines under you, and then you last.
Yeah. Your Marines understood the mission.
Yeah. So that's probably one of the toughest decisions I had to make, and the outcome. Now, if they wouldn't have hit IED, I wouldn't have that story, and I felt like a champ for being able to do that. But the enemy always has a vote,
right?
And that's in business too.
That's correct.
Knowing your competition, knowing your the pitfalls as you move forward with the business is you got to study, you got to read everything you can. That's how you make good decisions. It becomes intuitive. General Mattis, and everybody, he was a Marine, 4-star, and the Secretary of Defense. He said he had a 5,000-year-old mind. Reading books all the way back to the Greeks, right? So and I think in any profession, in any business, any endeavor, you got to study. You got to spend a lot of time. I tell all my Marines, for every hour that you PT, do physical training, there should be 1 hour of reading your profession every single day.
I love that. That's huge. Just that personal development side. But I think that goes back to that Marine Corps mindset of, know yourself and seek self-improvement, continually get better. It's interesting that you bring up studying the competition, studying the enemy. I remember when I was in, and the first Gulf War was about to go down, they started to send us, literature, anything that we could read about the enemy. Conversely, in the business sector, what I find is that so many people don't study their competition. They don't study their rivals out there, the people that'll pick their pockets. Now, fortunately in the business sector, most of it's not life and death, but that ability to understand the enemy, the rival, the competition is huge. How did you work on that with your Marines? In other words, when you were getting ready to deploy, what were some of the tactics where, especially in the urban warfare, how did you encourage them to, or what were some of the things that they did so they could learn about the enemy? Or did you have discussions with them? Because in the business sector, I find they almost never talk about their competition. They act like they're not out there, but in the military, that would be a fatal decision to ignore the competition, to ignore the enemy.
Yeah, we do a lot of that. There's multiple ways, tactical decision games where you put a scenario. I like to do that with my leaders. I can remember back as a company commander, and we would set the 5 lieutenants and me, the company commander. So 6 of us, we'd all take a tactical decision game to come up with our solution. I'd hand everybody a radio and send them to the 4 corners of the football field. And I would pick one to convey their answer, over the radio, which is harder than doing it face to face.
That's right.
Is more realistic. And I would say in today's world, even Zoom is not like me and you sitting in the same room, right?
That's right.
this is not touching people's souls the way that I believe that you have to do. You got, COVID has changed, how we think about that, but we got to get back to face-to-face, kneecap to kneecaps. But in order to convey, and study the enemy and then do it, and then bring everybody back in and ask another one, so what did he say? And you'll be surprised that they didn't pick up on his plan as well as you think it is. So that's a training evolution, but at the same time, you're studying the enemy because you use the enemy as the tactical decision games. That's just one of many ways. Now there's all kind of electronic ways to do it.
Sure. But I love that, because communication is so important, and we communicate in so many different ways. And without that physical connection, or at least the being able to see each other through Zoom, so much is lost. So to be able to have that drill for skill on communication is huge.
I agree. Yeah. And I think that would be important in business as well, particularly a large corporation that's spread out across the world. How do you do that and be really effective?
I really believe when I study, when I assess businesses and I look at where their issues are, their problems are, regardless if it's an attendance issue or a workflow issue, at the end of the day, there's going to be some form of communication breakdown. There was something that broke down on the communication side. And at least in the military, we had the concept of commander's intent. Now what I teach is leader's intent, where we convey the intention, right? So that when we're in radio silence, our subordinates or our direct reports can carry on without us. But I think in addition to not touching enough souls, in addition to not studying the enemy enough, I don't think businesses practice communication enough at the level that you did. I think it's not only brilliant, but it's relevant, because I've often found that in organizations, whether it's military or first responders, where lives are at stake, we tend to take the leadership bar and raise it higher. But when lives aren't at stake, even though livelihoods are, and you'll find this out when you start going into the business sector more and more and more, they become almost complacent when it comes to leadership. Like, well, if I don't do it, nobody's going to get hurt, nobody's going to die, so I'll get to it later. Whereas in your world, leadership comes first.
Right. Yeah. Well, maybe I can help some people down the road as they're old, retired. So we'll see.
I think that you can, sir. I think that you're going to make a huge impact out there. A lot of those tactics of touching souls, just getting to see your people, there's a lot of common sense to that people don't apply. And sometimes they just need to hear it from the right perspective. It goes back to looking out for your people. And I share this in businesses too. One of my favorite leadership principles in the Marine Corps is know your Marines, look out for their welfare. And I feel that look out for the welfare part in business sometimes gets overlooked. Like, we may know somebody's struggling, we may know somebody has a challenge, but we don't stop to do that last part that says look out for their welfare. And I was hoping you could share a story about looking out for the welfare of your Marines as it applies to, and I know this is going to blow people's minds, we're going to talk about washing machines and dryers for a second here. Can you just share your story about washing machines and dryers and looking out for the welfare of your Marines and how important that is?
All right. Yeah. So I told that story on another podcast you listened to, I think.
Yeah.
So I took over 3-6 early, 3rd Battalion, 6th Marines. So I was supposed to take 1-6 in the late summer of 2004, but this Afghan mission popped and 3-6 was tagged to go. I was the OPSO, the operations officer of the regiment, 6th Marine Regiment. So they switched me because the guy that was coming 3-6, he was not there yet, and he could take 1-6 later. So that's kind of how I got 3-6. And I took command early. I just got promoted to lieutenant colonel. It was March of 2004. We were deploying in April, 6 weeks later, Afghanistan. The battalion was not in very good shape at the time. I remember the division commander, Steve, General, damn, his name escapes me. I'll think of it in a minute. He's patted me on the back, and says, good luck, right? Because 3-6 they hadn't deployed in a long time. They had a bunch of drug problems and DUIs and stuff like that. So, yeah. But immediately getting a mission, getting focused, going somewhere was important. But so one of the first weekends after I took command on a Friday, my first meeting with that afternoon was with all the NCOs. About 300 NCOs are in an infantry battalion. And my wife and everybody was up at the club. We had gotten food, poo-poos and beers and stuff. And I didn't show up for about an hour and a half. She was pissed when I could spend all this money and I'm back there. But I got a picture of me sitting on a stool with a bunch of Marines around it, NCOs. That was my first meeting. So talk with the officers and staff NCOs the next Monday, and then talk to the Marines during that week of the first week. But that weekend, I went into the barracks and they were a disaster. All the rec rooms, as you remember, the recreation rooms where there was supposed to be TV and couches and stuff for Marines to be able to relax, were full of broken furniture. The wash machines, I grabbed a few of the NCOs. I'm like, what's going on? What's wrong here? And they're like, hey, sir, this place is a dump, right? Half our furniture is broke. Our washer and dryers don't work. We have to go out in town to wash our clothes, to wash our gear. I said, all right. So that Monday morning, I grabbed the sergeant major. He's the senior enlisted, the E9, and we went looking. And now that I commanded the base as a 1 and 2 star, I know exactly who they are. It's the maintenance guys. But I found the guys who do the maintenance in the barracks, and I took them a half a gallon of Jack Daniels. I was like, I need some washer and dryers fixed over in 3-6. Within a week, I had about 20 new washers and dryers. Right, getting involved, getting
That's
down,
right.
Figuring out the problems. And then in certain times, it takes your personal touch to make things happen. As things start to and they start to know that your intent and what you're doing, then you kind of pull back and let the NCOs, staff NCOs, and your subordinates run it. But you got to show that you give a shit. You care about them and their families, them and their lives, and just little things.
Yeah.
And we would do NCO meetings as a battalion commander after we got back from Afghanistan and before we went back to Iraq. We had about 8 months between the 2 deployments. And every month I'd have an NCO meeting. NCOs were special in an infantry battalion. There's about 300 out of 1,000 Marines that are NCOs, corporals and sergeants, NCOs. Mm-hmm. I know, I was, and they would, you'd let them just complain and bitch a little bit. And then you try to fix 1 or 2 things that you can fix. And that shows them that you're listening, that you care about them. Right? You can't fix it all, but you can get involved and fix a few things. And I would think in business, as you travel around, there's, your workers, if you listen to your workforce and what the problems are, and you really get involved and try to fix some of it, then they will believe in you. They'll start to believe in your vision. They'll believe in the direction you're taking the company. And that's, you lead, motivate, inspire, and then you trust them. And I think that's a story that worked for me a long time ago. What was that? That was 18 years ago, now almost 19 years ago. Yeah.
And what did it do for the morale for the Marines as they started to get new washers and dryers?
2 things changed the morale of that battalion. And one was, the most important, is we had a mission. We were going to Afghanistan. We were going to combat. We had 6 weeks before the new guy just took over. 6 weeks, and we're deploying. That's the first thing, and the most important probably. But just getting involved, caring about them, showing you care, I think made a difference. And then once the company commanders and the first sergeants know that the battalion commander's in the barracks on the weekend, then they'll start being in the barracks on the weekend, and the platoon commanders and the platoon sergeants. So you get your leadership, because it's really sergeants and below that live in the barracks. And, living in the barracks sucks, right? It's not
right.
Barracks, right?
I just think here's what I'm pulling from this. 6 weeks out, you have Afghanistan on your mind, as you should. But you go to the barracks and start to resolve some of the issues that the Marines are facing that maybe those issues weren't making it up to you unless you had gone in to see them. That, like you said, the kneecap, getting in that personal space with them. But the fact that you have a war on your mind and you took the time to get something which can seem so simple, but to have such a huge impact, washers and dryers, you got those fixed, sends a huge message about your intent, but also about how much you care about them.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's back to that saying I say, touch marine souls, right? But it takes a significant amount of your time to do it right.
So I have a question for you. I have a foundation, as I've shared with you, and we award scholarships to military spouses. And you alluded to earlier that your wife, Jennifer, obviously you guys you were married through your entire, how long were you married through the service?
Yeah, the whole time. I got married in April and I went active duty as a lieutenant 88. Yeah, 2 months before the whole time.
She was there the whole time with you. Yeah. And then you also mentioned earlier, touching their souls, taking care of what they need, their families. Just from your perspective, you have seen in 37 years, so many military people come and go, so many families. How important is the military spouse in the success of our military?
It's just huge. I say that, Jennifer she has more PTSD than I did, because she went to the hospital for the wounded Marines, went to some of the funerals. I mean, as a battalion commander's wife back at the time. And since then we've hired persons who come in and we pay them, and they kind of act as the lead person left behind. But it used to be the wives that did that, right? And then after husbands and but back in the day, it was the wives. And the first thing I did when I took over 3-6 is I asked 2 of my first sergeant's wives to be the key volunteer, they call. So I had key volunteers, first sergeant, company first sergeant. So one was married when they were a PFC, the other was married when they were Lance Corporal. I said, I didn't want my wife. I wanted, because 900 of the 1,000 Marines in your battalion are enlisted Marines.
Right.
So I want your enlisted Marine's wife to be the key volunteer, not mine. Mm-hmm. I think that helped a lot. And so my wife, and she's done this the whole time, Jennifer, has always been, she just wanted to be known as Jennifer, not the CO's wife or the CG's wife, and so forth. Yeah. So, but it's a tough, being a family in the Marine Corps with 10, 11 deployments over 30 years is tough, right? And particularly this past 20 years where we were in and out of combat. And the effect on your children and your kids, don't know if dad's coming home type thing. And some come back severely wounded. Yeah. So not easy. And American people, a lot of them really don't understand, because we don't, only about 1% of us serve in the military. And even a fraction of that really goes into harm's way. Yeah.
That's one of the things, for our foundation, the Think Great Foundation, we put the military spouse as the focal point, and all the scholarships goes towards her or him. And we also want to give them a voice. We're sharing, here's what the struggles are, here's what the challenges are they face. I think once we acknowledge that the military spouse is out there, those in the civilian sector, it's kind of one of those common sense things, the aha moments. They say, oh, yes, yes, yes. So we found tremendous amount of donors and sponsors and support, because people don't stop to think about the spouse. So, absolutely. So you have 37 years in, and to a certain extent, Jennifer did too.
Yeah, I mean, we were dating when I enlisted in the Marine Corps in 85, of course, and then got married right before I went active duty in 88. So yeah, long time. And we're glad to be back home. This is where we're from, where we moved back to, and all of our family live here. So
well, I'm glad for all of you. I did want to ask you, I liked one of the stories that you told on a certain incident you had where you had 2 fingers crushed. I didn't like that part of the story, of course, but there was this determination in you to get back to your unit after this incident happened, including where you had a direct order to keep some pins in your finger, and you went a different pathway. Can you share a little bit about that incident and what drove you to take the course of action that you did?
Yeah. Well, I was a stupid second lieutenant to start with. So this was the fleet. So May of 89, we're in exercise, and an AAV hatch comes loose and it crushes my last 2 fingers on my left hand, particularly my ring finger. So I hadn't wore a ring since then. They cut the ring off, and and I've never wore a ring. I almost lost that finger because of that. A month later, we're in Panama doing the jungle warfare training because we're scheduled to deploy to Panama that fall. So we're down there doing a month-long deployment training at an Army base that used to be down there, Fort Sherman, not there anymore. And they had put 2 pins to hold the bones together where that ring had crushed the bones. The other finger broke pretty clean, so it was healing okay. And it wasn't healing. The bone was not taken to the 2 pins. And my finger was literally starting to rot, right? I mean, it was nasty. And the battalion surgeon, a Navy lieutenant, 03 lieutenant, wouldn't take them out. I went to him, he'd clean it up, and I was like, hey, these pins need to come out. And he's like, nah, I disagree. So he sent me to Balboa Hospital, which was in Panama City on the other side of the island, or not island, but of the country, on the other side of the Panama Canal. And the Army doctor, I'll never forget, it was an Army major doctor, says, yeah, these pins need to come out. I'm like, okay, let's take them out. He's like, I can't take them out. I didn't put them in. You got to go back to your surgeon. He has to take them out. I'm like, all right. So I go back, I tell the doc this, and he says, I disagree. So I literally went back to my hooch, my XO, Jeff Jewell, first lieutenant, got a pair of needle nose pliers. I took a pocket knife because you could see the things moving, and I took them and cut 2 holes and pushed those pins, and he got them with pliers and plucked them out. And then I just started putting alcohol on it and clean it, keep it clean. And I went back to the field and was training. About a week later, the doc finds me in the field. He's like, hey, you're supposed to come back to me and I clean up that fingers. I was like, I don't need to. It's healing up. I took the pins out. He was pissed, right? Kind of wrote me up, tells on me. I get a call. I got to go see the battalion commander. I'm a second lieutenant, right? So I got to go see the lieutenant colonel, Sands Robnick. Won't never forget him. And I go in the little tent, and he's like, he's NJP, non-judicial for a lieutenant. It was kind of a mock thing, is what it ended up being. And he asked me, did I disobey the doc's order? And I said, yes, sir. He said, why'd you do that? I said, because my finger was rotting off. And he says, well, how is it now? I was like, it's healing up. It's done. It's fixed. You know, he tore the NJP up and said, get out of here. Go back to work. So I guess the point of that is I wouldn't break the law, but disobeying regulations and orders sometimes the situation doesn't fit is required, particularly in combat. There's times when the order that you've been given or the policy that's been in place and you're out forward does not match the situation. You got to make a call.
Goes back to that common sense.
Yeah, and you got to act like every job you're in is the last job you're ever going to do, and you're going to do it right, and you're going to do the right thing no matter what. And that's hard.
So there's that fine line, right? You have the rules, and you have to know when you need to break or bend those rules slightly based on the situation, the variables that you're facing.
And you go back to that intent, right? We got FMFM1 or MCDP1 warfighting.
Yep.
And that's what the whole book's about. It's about commander's intent and being able, when the forces, the leaders are out forward and they're not with the boss, that they know the intent and they got to be able to make the decision to get to the final solution. And sometimes if you allow that to happen, sometimes you'll suck your teeth like, man, I wouldn't have done it that way. But you got to allow your subordinates to make those calls, particularly if they accomplish the mission, just maybe not the way that you would have done it. That's what a good leader's got to be able to do.
I think that's so important, especially in the business sector. We see people, a lot of times they have that it's my way or the highway mindset.
Yeah. And in control, vice, trust and inspire. There's a book about that, that I read a month or so ago. I listened to actually a month or so ago. Yeah, the command and control version doesn't work in today's world.
Right.
But right. FMF and MCDP1 warfighting that's all it is. It's the difference between command and control and trust and inspire. And inspire and trust and motivate, right? I use motivate, inspire, then trust. But
Well, you're probably going to find, as I did. I mean, when I got out, I realized I'm not in Kansas anymore. The business sector was run completely different than the Marine Corps. But over 37 years, you've gone into businesses, you've experienced it, whether you shop at a place or eat at a place, you start to get a vibe of how things are run. It's interesting that there isn't more of the autonomy that's created, where I think people have a perception of the Marine Corps. They just think it's all barking orders and nobody thinks for themselves, or the military for that matter. Some people don't understand, but you're a big proponent of building up those direct reports so they can make those decisions that may be different than how you handled it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. That's what our Marine Corps philosophy warfighting is all about, right? Is you give the vision and you allow the subordinates to do. You tell them what you want to accomplish, not how to accomplish it. And I see a lot of leaders that can't do that. They just cannot let go, and they're smarter than everybody else, and so they got to make all the decisions, and that slows down tempo.
That's right.
The more people you get involved, I say that your circle of trust needs to be as large as you can make it. And I got a story about that, the Fighting 15. When I was a company commander after taking over, battalion commander taking over 3-6, the morale problems that we talked about earlier, and one of them, the first sergeant. So I come up with this concept of Fighting 15. And in an infantry battalion, you have 5 companies. So there's 5 company commanders, they're captains. And then they have 5 first sergeants. Each one has a first sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
That's 10. And then the CO, me, the XO major, the battalion OPSO, a major, the sergeant major, the senior enlisted, and then the Marine gunner, the battalion gunner that I treat like a major. So that's 15. And at any time I could, that I had to make a big decision about the battalion, particularly in garrison, is I wanted those 15 people in the room. And the most important group of that Fighting 15 was those first sergeants, because if first sergeants were involved in the decision making, even if they didn't win and they saw how the decisions were made, they would go downstairs into that 200-man rifle company and headquarters company and weapons company and support it and be behind it.
You had their buy-in.
Fighting 15. So that's the circle of trust. And if you can start to build that, then those subordinates will understand your vision and make it happen.
I think that's brilliant. I think it's so important in the business sector for people to build that circle of trust. There's a chapter in your book right there if you ever decide to write a book. But that concept of the circle of trust, that's needed in businesses. I think I see too many people without the circle. They just have they're a one man or a one woman show. It's my way or the highway, or here's how I've always done it, to their own detriment too, by the way.
But that will slow tempo, in particular in today's market, in today's world. A flat organization, the flatter you can make it, the better. General McChrystal in his books talk about that when he was, how the special forces was working in Iraq and then later in Afghanistan. Speed and tempo, as information comes in, they got to understand what you want to accomplish and then allow the guys to go. And again, sometimes it might not be how you would have done it, but if it accomplishes the mission, then you got to pat them on the back and say,
that's right. There's more than one way to skin a cat, and we've got to be okay with that. I always go back to the idea that I think leaders should hire people better than them. So if we're hiring people better than us, they might have a better idea than us. That's at least my theory.
That's good. One person is not smarter than everybody else in the room. You got big.
That's right. Well, let me ask you this, because here's something that I feel the civilian population has difficulty comprehending from time to time, because their perception of the military, if they haven't been in, is very much, again, barking orders, just do what you're told. As you've climbed up the ranks, you have probably encountered your leaders that you disagreed with, and probably had some of your subordinates disagree with you. But say that part again, sir.
I encourage that.
I love that.
Everybody that disagrees with you and has another idea, rather than you just say thank you, right? That's a good, and every now and then you've got in public amongst the groups, you gotta change your mindset. That's a better idea. And if they see you doing that here and there, even if you think that your way may be better, that's going to build your team better. So
I don't
yeah,
think that's done enough. And I think that they feel that the military is probably, again, just barking orders. So how would you recommend approaching somebody? Like, you've had to go upward. So let's just say even at the colonel level or lieutenant colonel, you may have disagreed with a general. There's got to be a way of speaking to that general without just saying your idea sucks, right? So
and that general has got to allow that to start with. There are leaders that don't allow, right? You just you don't go against what's put out there, which is unhealthy, not good.
that's right.
Well,
There's a need for that.
I've been in that position recently where, I disagreed with the direction and I've made it clear and I've said what I believe.
Yeah.
I have a saying, like a couple, you got to act like the job you're in is the last job you're ever going to do. That ain't easy, but you got to do that. If you're going to you're doing the right thing. And your peers are more important than your boss, and your Marines or your subordinates are more important than your peers. If you can operate that way and do the right thing and have the best interests of the organization, the unit in mind in every decision you make, which ain't easy, right? It's human nature. That's a little bit against you. You got to talk to yourself a lot about that, it's not about me, it's about the organization. But if you actually can care more about what your peers think about you than your boss, and more about what your Marines think about you than your peers, then you're going to probably do the right thing and win in the long run. But so every now and then, run into bosses that just does not allow it, and that's when it's time to move on, maybe.
Right. I think so. I think there's too many yes men or yes women in the workplace. But like you said, it's that general level. It's that CEO. They have to be open for these new ideas. I just had a team meeting yesterday. Everybody puts their ideas on the table. I do want to hear them all. There's some that I don't agree with, but sometimes I may not agree with it, but after it sinks in for a little bit, I go, okay, I see where you're coming from on that one. I think that makes sense. Yeah. So I'm open for it though.
Yeah, that's the big circle of trust. We've hit that theme on 2 or 3 times here in the last time. So yeah, it's and you got to think about that as a leader and talk about that to yourself. When you look at yourself in the mirror in the mornings, right? Yes, you got to be honest with yourself. And there's some people that can't. There's leaders who actually teach leadership, but they're actually terrible leaders themselves. They really don't preach. They know, and they've read and they've studied, and they can talk about it, but they actually can't do it. The say do gap, right? There's people out there that move up and get ahead in that, but they're not happy. Organization is not happy, and they're not as productive as they could be.
You've had 37 years of being in a leadership factory in the Marine Corps. You'll find that most people in the business sector, most leaders have had very little leadership development, if any at all. And I have a course I run. It's called the Leadership Link, and I have a 12-month course. It's 3 hours per month, and we've had hundreds of people go through and graduate from the program. One of the biggest takeaways is that when you truly study leadership and start to apply it, you see the gaps. Like you said, that you say it much better, the say-do gap. You see that in leaders. This is what they're saying, but they're not doing it. And I think leadership really boils down to, yes, you have to have the knowledge of it, the experience, but it is not so much as what you say is what you do. It's got to.
You say and you show your priorities, and then you got to put your schedule to it, your time.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
A lot of people will say stuff's important. Like, hey, the night live fire in a rifle company is the most important thing we do. And then you don't show up for the night live fire that your rifle company's doing, right? That's unacceptable. You can't do that. That's just
correct. There's too many leaders getting out of the essential tasks and projects, meetings and exercises they need to be involved in, because now they feel like they have this elevated position. I don't have to do that anymore. That's beneath me. When their presence there is going to make a big impact.
And there's times, the higher up you go, you got to figure out where that presence is, because there's many meetings and planning groups that you don't need to be in. It ain't time for you. right? Because your subordinates, you've given your subordinates the intent, and they're going to figure out. And then there's times, but that's a feel. That's the more you do it. I've been lucky during those 34 plus as an active duty Marine officer. About 2.5 years as a reservist, enlisted reservist. So 34 years. I've been lucky that I commanded in every rank, second lieutenant through major general. I was lucky that I had a flag the entire 8 years I was a general. I was a command. I wasn't a staff officer. I've been a staff officer very few times. Been a battalion 3 times, and then been an OPSO. I was an XO for a year in the March to Baghdad, which was working for an unbelievable colonel, and that was. But I guess the more you do it, the better you're at it, and the mistakes.
Right.
Look back, if you really reflect, right? That takes time. You got to take that time to reflect and be honest with yourself. Looking yourself in the mirror when you're shaving and say, okay, you were an idiot yesterday. Yeah,
I think you hit the nail on the head again. I encourage leaders at the end of the day to reflect on what they did as a leader. Just spend a few minutes, at least think about it.
Yeah. Well, good way to do also is to jot it down.
Yeah.
If you write it down, you remember, you're like, okay, I screwed that up, or that was good that I did today. Or
I think it's so important. There's so many people at the top of the chain of command or the org chart, if you will, whether they're CEOs or COOs or anything in the C-suite, presidents, vice presidents, whatever. They almost feel like they have to have the persona, the appearance that they're perfect. And here you are, 2-star general saying, hey, maybe I messed this up, or did I act like an idiot yesterday? Is there something I can fix? I think there's so much power in that because it shares the vulnerability. I think a lot of leaders are almost imprisoned by this perception of I have to be a perfect leader.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time on the couch of the sergeant major, your command sergeant major, on the couch of your deputy or your XO, your executive officer, your second in charge. Go down and get a cup of coffee, sit down with your OPSO, and just say, yeah, we messed that up, right? I need you to help me fix this because we didn't do it. So, but that I call them pushaways. You got to push away from that desk, push away from that computer, and get out amongst your people. And the higher up you go, that group changes, which is what's not fun about being a general, right? That's what I hated about being a general. I didn't get to touch young Marine souls like I used to.
The push away, that's powerful.
Yeah.
There's too many people not pushing away. They're getting stuck behind that desk, behind that computer screen.
Yeah, I got 2 pushaways. Push away from that desk and that computer and get out amongst your people. But also, when you're getting too fat, you got to push away from that dinner table more than you got to be.
There's no doubt about that, especially after Thanksgiving. That's a good message to have.
Yeah,
well,
always leave a little food on your plate as you start to get old and fat.
That's right, especially when you're not PTing as much, right? You gotta make sure you're PTing.
I don't care how much you get older.
So I have a very important question for you. I know people are going to be fascinated by this. How are you enjoying your retirement?
Yeah, well, I'm a big bird hunter. So where's my dog? Hey, Jake, come here. Jake, come. And I quail hunt a lot and bird hunt. So I got to go. I went up to northern Maine and hunted wild grouse and woodcock for a week. I went out to South Dakota, hunted pheasants for a week. I've done 3 or 4. This Friday, I'm going on a wounded warrior quail hunt down in Alabama. So I get to be with some as a mentor. I signed up for 2. I signed up for a duck hunt out in Stuttgart, Arkansas with some wounded warriors in January. So taking my son quail hunting down South Georgia the week after Christmas. So I'm just trying to, that's why I wanted to take 6 months off and actually do something I really love and spend some time with, the people that I hadn't seen in time and so forth. And then I'm going to get back after it here pretty quickly and I want to do my second part of my life.
Well, you certainly deserve the downtime right now, General. I know that the second part kind of starts on 15 February. And just curious if you have some goals for after 15 February, some things that you're working on.
Yeah, so there's 3 goals that my retired mentor generals tell you should think about, and that's what I'm trying to do. So one of them, first one is find 1 or 2 nonprofits that you really care about and involve. So I'm on the board of the Marine Gunners Association that does scholarships for spouses and children of Marine gunners. That's our infantry weapons and tactics specialist. I love gunners. I'm an honorary gunner. I feel like. So the CWO 5, your chief warrant officer 5 as high as you can go. So the 5 board members, 4 of them are retired 5s, and then they asked me as a retired.
That's fantastic.
So I was never a gunner. I'm an outsider. So that was honor. And then this Wounded Warrior outfit that it's not the Wounded Warrior Foundation, but it's a different one. This one I'm going to Friday's A Hero. Former Marine of mine that we served together. It started. Yeah. The Tunnel for Tyrrells looks like one that I would like maybe get involved with. But so that's number 1. Number 2 is how do you give back? But so mentoring. I would like to go back to the Marine Corps, and it's called MSTP, Marine Staff Training Program, and they have senior mentors, 2 and 3 stars, that mentor university, right? The Missionary Warfare School, Command and Staff College, and the War College, and so forth. So I'd like to get involved with that, and that pays just a little bit. That pays you enough to, for your travel and stuff.
Sure.
Third, I'd like to get involved with teaching leadership and organization, that stuff in the business world, and I guess that's where you would make a little money, right? So make a little money in your retirement to pad your retirement, in order to get a cabin up in the mountains or something. So that's the three bends that I'm looking at to be involved with.
I think those are 3 incredible aspects of your new journey. I feel that you have an incredible story, and we could only scratch the surface of it today. But I feel as a speaker and as a trainer, you're going to be incredible. I think that your message on leadership is needed out there, and I think your ability to relate it to the business sector is powerful. So yes, you've had it in this extreme environment in the Marine Corps, but everything that you're saying is needed in the business sector too. So I think that you're going to be a tremendous speaker. Maybe we'll share the stage at some point together.
Do that sometime.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll work on that. That'll be one of our goals for 2023. We'll get a couple Marines, you and I, up on stage, make a huge impact, go on tour. Well, let me ask you this. If somebody wanted to reach out to you, they were interested in talking to you about some of your future endeavors, especially the speaking side, what's the best way for them to contact you?
My email, I guess.
Okay.
So JD Alford, JDALFORD 63, year I was born, at Gmail. So JD Alford 63 at gmail.com. That's
perfect. Perfect.
Well,
I'm here to. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
I don't have a business email or anything, but that's my personal email.
Awesome. Well, myself, the Think Great team, we're here to support you in your new journey too. And I can only say on behalf of everyone listening, the Think Great experience, we appreciate your service to our great nation and our beloved Corps. And I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you taking some time out of your schedule today to share some of your insights with us. It was truly an honor to have you on today.
Yeah, it's good to be on with you, Eric. And hopefully we'll link up again, have another beer together. I think I owe you. You paid for the last one.
It would be an honor to have some more beers with you, sir. We'll definitely do that. But thanks again for being on.
Thanks. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.